All in all, the telescope was huge. Built in orbit, it took multiple years and thousands of tons of rocket to get the materials and manpower up there. A series of mirrors and collectors allowed it to achieve a diameter of well over 20 meters. While it was planned to be shared by the community of astronomers, the first mission had taken priority. We wanted to take an extremely detailed look at one of our closest star systems. The data was beyond our wildest imaginations. We discovered that one of the exoplanets could actually contain alien life. After extensive studying of its atmospheric spectra, we had undeniable proof of liquid water, organic compounds, and even seasonal variations in the levels of carbon dioxide. There was only one way to know for certain if we could meet new civilizations. A group of 20 mad physicists had come up with a drive which could theoretically exceed the speed of light. Years of calculations led to our first test. In space, we attempted to remotely send a small probe through a warp bubble to our moon. The warp field collapsed almost immediately, and the small probe along with about a gram of hydrogen were immediately converted into mass energy. The images burned into 1,000 hypersensitive telescope cameras reminds us of the dangers to this day. Refinements were made, and we had gotten fairly good at warping gram-scale objects within our own system. Any object with volume and mass gathered particles floating around space and released them as an outwards-facing energy wave before exiting warp, making it very dangerous to nearby objects. However, no matter how much power we used, it seemed impossible to warp an object larger than a pebble within the solar system without the field destabilizing. Strangely enough, light by itself was able to be warped with very precise timing. The massless nature seemed to give it a very stable field. Another year of calculations and data collection led us to believe that it was our star's solar wind which was destabilizing the warp fields. A plan was developed. We would send a probe directly to the potential life-bearing star to gather information and get a close look at the planet. It would warp in outside of the system, do a flyby, then warp out after 1,000 years. Microscopic packets of warp energy containing pulses of light would be sent to a station to bypass light lag. The suspense was killing everyone in the room. 100 tons of exotic materials and electronics and being pushed by the most advanced MHD drive ever built. It would not bode well for the budget if it failed now. Just getting it into orbit required us to create a 10-kiloton rocket. It has almost time. Telemetry is nominal. The probe is crossing the heliopause. Pressure gradient is reducing to a negligible amount in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. And it's done. Warping in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Warp completed. Data link established. A view screen was playing a grainy video of the probe's cameras. With that, the room exploded in cheering. Alcohol had been brought for the situations of a failure and a success. Alcohol and more was consumed. The probe, happily cruising through interstellar space, only took a minute to cross the distance. Coming out of warp, there was a massive burst of radiation, and particles as well. Over a ton of hydrogen gas was converted into energy. Okay, people, let us turn the camera into the system and see if the third planet actually has life on it. Jovian space traffic control, polar orbit of Titan, Saturn. Sir, a massive radiation pulse just occurred near the southern heliosphere section of our solar system. Our best guess estimates it to have a 23 gigaton equivalent. What the fuck? The probe's mission control team, 1 week after pulse. Probe has breached heliosphere and is beginning descent guidance. Met was looking through the low FOV camera aimed directly at the third planet. It had been about a week since the probe exited warp. They had decided to exit a bit far away from the heliosphere area in case they were off by a tiny amount, but everything had gone well. This far away, it was still impossible to prove anything. And hey car, look at this. There was a big radiation pulse, again, and again. It paused for a few seconds, but it back. There seems to be about a second between pulses. A small crowd ran over to Med station. Due to the distance, the image of the planet was only a few pixels wide, but it was flashing in regular intervals. They watched for about a minute before Carr broke the silence. Holy shit, is this a nuclear war going on? The spectrograph shows signs of fissile decay of uranium. I hope we didn't warp in to witness the death of a civilization we literally just discovered. What the hell is going on? No, I don't think it is a nuclear war. It's too regular for it to be a random attack. And it has been going on for almost 2 minutes without pause. Maybe that is just how they travel around their system? Maybe they are testing warp like we were? Met sighed. This is also assuming this isn't some anomalous natural phenomena. Lest, could you send a wee re-sapient signal? Maybe we can get their attention and get some answers. Lest nodded. I'll start with warp pulses consisting of prime numbers, then 20 digits of pi and the root of 2, aimed at all of the planets. It should repeat automatically. It might take a few hours for a response if they don't have warp technology, though. If there is intelligent life and they respond, we can send them the atomic masses of the periodic table to establish a baseline. NASA headquarters, Earth, 1 week after pulse. It matches the EM spectrum of the anomalous radiation pulse next to Alpha Centauri that SETI picked up 5 years ago. Pure gamma radiation, but this time with some really exotic particles. Bill, this is almost certainly extraterrestrial life. We should send them a hello signal, Samuel argued. I get that, Sam, but what if they are hostile? We shouldn't give away our positions until we send up a greeting party, or at least have something near them. It had been a very long week. The explosion at what was essentially the solar system's South Pole had really kicked humanity into overdrive. Half of Earth and the colonies on Mars, Titan, and Vesta had all suddenly become aware that we may not be alone in this universe. The method of that information being shown to us was not helpful to calm the minds of humanity, and especially the militaries of various groups. Of course, even a massive explosion like that was not dangerous to Earth considering the distance. In fact, it was barely visible to the naked eye if you were stranded on an island in the center of the Pacific Ocean. Still, humanity was torn in a massive debate as to whether it was a warning shot or just the way the aliens propelled themselves. Fine, we let the ship do it. It simplifies things if there is only one unified party doing the talking, and we can still process data here, Samuel finally replied. Using nuclear explosions as a method of propulsion was actively and publicly being developed in order to ship millions of tons of materials between the planets within a reasonable amount of time. It was marketed as a way to decrease the Earth's stockpile of nuclear weaponry without allowing the money spent making them go to waste. The first ever Orion Drive-powered spacecraft was sitting on the surface of the moon, waiting to go on its maiden flight and prove the concept. Using pre-existing mining bases, the metal required to build it was almost entirely sourced from the moon. The hardest part of the entire operation was converting pre-existing nuclear devices into the specialized shaped charges and actually getting them to the moon. You see, nuclear bombs in space are rather less effective than they are on Earth, at least when it comes to transferring kinetic energy to a target. The radiation would still melt your bones from inside you, but the lack of an atmosphere in space means that there is no medium for a pressure wave to travel through. The way we get around this is via a system which first converts hard radiation into thermal heat energy, and that then converts itself into pure kinetic energy due to the intense pressures generated by the heat. This pressure is then channeled directly into a thick tungsten or depleted uranium liner, which gets converted into a hypervelocity plasma jet, which is extremely good at transferring momentum and energy. In a civil use, this then pushes up against a meter or so thick and 30-meter diameter circular plate of steel, which itself is covered in an ablative layer of oil to prevent excessive damage. This transfers its momentum through a set of massive pistons connected to the rear of the spaceship in order to lower the peak acceleration to a survivable level. The way the nuke actually gets to the area behind the plate is through a very well-armored gun assembly in the rear of the ship, which shoots the nuke through a hole in the plate. That is an Orion drive. This system can also be weaponized. If you scale it up massively and shape the charge correctly, it forms an extremely tight beam of hypervelocity tungsten plasma which slowly spreads out like a shotgun and does not stop until it impacts something. Kasaba howitzers are considered WMDs, and only a few have actually been created due to how specific of a situation would be required to actually be effective. They also conveniently fit into the gun of an Orion drive. Anyways, shipping 500 tons of weapons-grade uranium, the moon was the most tense moment of every government's existence. But the fact that the lunar shuttle had major representatives of all of the major powers prevented any incidents. The constructed ship was named Torch. Starting from the top of the ship, the engine is down, the ship's shape consists of a 30-meter diameter and 5-story hemispherical tank with a 2-meter gap filled with water, within which is the crew area filled with 100 members. The water acts as a radiation shielding against cosmic radiation and as emergency remass for a high-efficiency 1-megawatt arc-jet thruster mounted on the top of the ship. Below the crew module itself are 4 small, 500-kilowatt supercritical CO2 nuclear reactors. Mounted radially to the outside of the ship are 4 large triangular radiators which reject waste heat from the nuclear reactors while still being within the shadow of the nuclear blast cone. There are also 2 smaller radiators which reject heat from the crew next to the arc-jet on the top of the ship. Below the nuclear reactors is a 1-meter thick steel-cased and supported polyethylene radiation shield impregnated with beryllium and lithium oxides. Now we get to the nuclear bomb autocannon. This consists of a several-story magazine filled to the brim with low-power nuclear-shaped charges. An automatic loader fills a revolving mechanism with a nuclear device, which gets rotated into position and shot out the back at 50 meters per second with a compressed air charge, where it travels through an opened blast door, past the pusher plate, and then explodes once it reaches the correct distance from the ship. Due to government bureaucracy, the first Orion drive ever made, of course, also had to have a crew of at least 25 people from each of the four major powers to prevent the drone ship filled with nukes has become a missile situation from occurring. It also didn't really have an initial mission because nobody could really come to a conclusion as to what the giant nuclear bomb-powered spacecraft's first mission should be. The discovery of alien life changed that. Terran Jovan Republic ship Torch, the far side of the Earth's moon. 1 week after Pulse. Today we are going to take a step which I personally think is about as risky as jumping into the mouth of an active volcano without a parachute, but a step. We are going to investigate potential aliens, folks. The real deal. We are going to ride into space on a pillar of the most metal ever sent into orbit at one point in time. As your captain, it is my job to keep you safe. We were going to potentially have our first face-to-face contact with another sapient being, and you should be excited. We re-riding a candle made out of burning 10,000 tons of TNT every second. We'll be the first humans to go past the orbital distance of Pluto, and I do not want us to be the first humans to die past the orbit of Pluto. This journey will take 5 months to intercept the alien ship and 5 months to decelerate to get back to the moon. We have 3 main objectives. 1. Make physical contact and determine friendliness. 2. If friendly, establish a means of communication. 3. If hostile, we defend the solar system, determine their technology level, and attempt to reverse engineer their FTL technology. We launch in 10 minutes. The bridge was buzzing with excitement and no small amount of horrified, "What have I done to get here?" expressions. A circular view screen covered the sides of the bridge, using a ring of cameras on the outside with spliced videos to provide the ultimate panoramic video of riding a series of nuclear explosions into space. On the floor was a camera which was looking directly down the nuke gun S-barrel to take a video of the launch process. Captain William Robert Monger knew that this was going to be a blast. Liftoff in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, yeehaw, fire in the hole. The ship shuddered under the sudden acceleration. The entire view screen went white as the reflected light off of the moon's surface blinded the cameras. The launch camera caught a glimpse of red-hot lunar regolith being converted into volcanic glass right before the blast shield closed, and another shudder was felt as the pusher plate bottomed out. There was a moment of silence and zero gravity as the ship stopped accelerating. Captain William yelled at the plate engineer, "Carl! Increase the piston stiffness. We don't want to get rattled to death." Carl winced a bit. "Yes, sir. We should be good." Ivy also increased the damping so it doesn't slam back to top dead center as fast. "We might need a few more blasts to tune it properly, though." William sighed. "Let's keep her on the safe side for now. We can handle a few extra Gs, but the ship can handle the piston bottoming out constantly. Start it back up when it's ready." Carl engaged the engine once more. The initial shudder occurred once more, but the bone-crunching slam of the pusher plate impacting the ship didn't return. It was replaced by a strange waving sensation as the ship constantly went between 2 and 2. 2 G-forces every time the nuke went off. A new voice called out, "Ugh, I think I'm going to get seasick. Does anyone have any Dramamine or the equivalent?" William responded, "Yeah, actually. Hey, Igor, can you get Dave some motion sickness pills? And make sure to go distribute some around the crew. I have a feeling you were not alone in your suffering, Dave. Walk carefully. We were going to have to burn hard for about 30 minutes to clear the Earth's gravity well before we start our main burn. We were safe here due to the Earth being in the Moon's shadow, but I really don't feel like accidentally emptying 1,000 satellites in low Earth orbit." The communication station beeped. Dave looked at it with slightly less nausea than the previous minute. "That's strange. We were getting packets from somewhere. We don't have line of sight to any communication satellites nearby. No information, just bursts of signals. 2, 3, 5, 7. 11, 13. My God, they are prime numbers!" Terran, Jovan Republic ship, Torch, escape trajectory from Earth, 1 week after Pulse. So their entire signal consisted of prime numbers, 20 digits of PI, and 20 digits of the root of 2. This is undeniable proof that intelligent life just contacted us. The signal I send back should contain similar data. We need to use simple pulses like they did in order to establish a baseline for communication. I believe we should repeat their message exactly, then add some new information. Something short and simple so it doesn't get confused with something else. I am kind of blanking on what we should send, to be honest. Dave shook his head. Anyone have any suggestions? A hand raised. Yes, Monica? Just call NASA. We were about to be in range of their comms. A pause. Oh, right, that might be a good idea. Captain William butted in. You'd better get Jovian Space Command in on this. They probably all got the signal anyways, and we don't want everyone left out of the loop. Jovian Space Command headquarters, approximately 20 feet to the west of NASA headquarters, Earth. 1 week after Pulse, we just received a message from the Torch ship. They got the same signal we did and wanted to know what to say. I am going to talk to Samuel. Bill walked over to NASA headquarters. Honestly, it was both a genius, but also a slightly silly move to stick both agencies right next to each other. It allowed for extremely easy collaboration and coordination of launches, but the hour-and-a-half delay when communicating with Saturn created some extremely awkward problems. Orbital stations acting as traffic control were required on every actively mined moon in the area, in order to prevent the lightly shielded engines of NTR cargo ships from accidentally irradiating nearby ships, and it was really quite impossible for Jovian Space Command to make split decisions regarding the affairs of space around Saturn. However, the ability to just walk over to speak to the director of NASA in times like this was extremely convenient. Hey Sam, we need to talk. Agreed. Want a drink? Samuel opened a bottle of whiskey and poured 2 glasses. Bill accepted one. Thanks. Our first contact message shall be made while slightly buzzed by your decree, huh? Samuel laughed and went on. Anyways, the Torch has some seriously powerful communication equipment, and as it gets closer, it will be able to meet up with their ship and hopefully get more information on how their technology works so we can communicate more clearly with them. We were pretty certain they were not hostile, seeing as they've had a week to look at us and all they've done is send a pretty powerful hello signal. I think that our response message should repeat their message back, then send a 3, 4, and 5 to show which planets we have humans on, as well as the average atomic masses of hydrogen, carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen to show them what we consist of. Bill frowned. I'm not sure if they'd get that 3, 4, and 5 represent planets. That is a bit too vague in my opinion. Also, I think we should add those element S melting points in Kelvin, as well as 27315 for water. If we then give them the boiling point of water in Kelvin, they might be able to figure out our atmospheric pressure. Things will get a lot easier once we are not limited to sending what is effectively Space Morse code. I think that they should try to get radio communications with the other ship. If they have radio receivers, we could get a pretty basic dialogue going. Assuming they can send information instantaneously, we were still going to have a 15-hour delay between messages though. Right, I'll tell the Torch to send our atomic data towards the aliens, as well as send a FM signal. If long-wave radio works, that would be very helpful for speeding up information transfer. Samuel contacted the Torch. Captain William, the eyes of the entire solar system are on you, and your broadcast is going to be public. There's no way in hell this isn't going to be the most recorded message in the history of mankind. Here's what you were going to do. The Probe S mission control team, 1 week and a day after Pulse, was discussing the data with the team. So, about 1 radiation pulse per second for 30 minutes, then it stopped. It's been silent ever since. We got very lucky in our Probe S placement because we have what is essentially a top-down view of their entire solar system, and we don't need to triangulate trajectories in order to get a rough idea of what is going on. I haven't had time to map it out, but the 6th planet, a gas giant, seems to have a significant number of moons as well as a quite substantial ring. On the high-gain IR telescope, some much smaller signatures have been spotted near that planet, as well as one which seems to be in transit between the 4th and 6th planet. I suspect that those are from radiative surfaces rejecting heat at over 800 degrees. Maybe some form of very high-temperature heat engine? Lest spoke up. Hey, I got a response. It appears to be from the 3rd planet. They repeated our message in the long-wave radio band. And there says some new stuff. I'll read out the numbers. 1008 pause. 14 pause 12011. Pause. 3675. Pause. 14007. Pause. 63. Pause. 15999. Pause. 54. Pause. Oh, and a FM radio transmission. It isn't an alien language, but I'll play it out anyways. This is Captain William Robert Monger of the Terran and Jovian Republic ship, Torch. Greetings, and welcome to the Sol System. We hope you come in peace. Our collective governments have decided to send my ship to make first contact with you. We're going to be sending you constant radio signals for the entire journey to give you guys something to chew on during the trip. If you wouldn't mind reciprocating that, be great. This ship is powered by nuclear bombs exploding approximately every second, but once we're in the cruise phase, we should be good to communicate. We plan on taking a high-speed route directly to your craft. It's a pretty high inclination because you guys ended up in one of the most inconvenient spots ever. Carr spoke first. So now we need to figure out what this all means. They clearly have radio technology, so I believe we can start sending them information. I think we should immediately start giving them a basic course of our language. Lest replied. Agreed, that would be useful. Also, we can use multiple frequencies to send more information. It might not be the fastest, but we could also send bits of data. Gasp! We could send them the binary instructions for a basic computer operating system. That would allow us to run video programs on their computers and give them visuals of what we look and sound like. Carr, could you get a team to figure out what those numbers mean? Met spoke up. Hey guys, the radiation pulses have started again. In order to intercept the alien ship in 5 months, the torch will have to achieve a velocity just in excess of 1.34 million meters per second. This will require the expenditure of 74,800 individual 10-kiloton boosted fission nuclear devices on the way there, then another 60,000 devices in order to slow down. Averaging out to 2.1 geese, the entire first boost will take about 20 hours. 20 hours of 2 geese might be survivable, but it would not be comfortable or viable for the long-term health of the crew. So the first leg of the trip would be split into 20 separate burns, each 1 hour long, with 2 hours between burns. The size of the nuclear devices means that they were not as efficient as possible, but this is an almost unladen test bed, and if they were any bigger, we would not be able to deal with the excessive accelerations. On the way back, due to the lowered mass of the ship, we expended almost half of our fuel. We will be seeing an average of 4 G-forces. The burns will be further split into 1-minute burns with a 30-minute rest period, for a total of 30 minutes of burning for a day, then a day to break. This would repeat 10 times. To slightly reduce fuel usage, it is planned to slow down to 30,000 m/s, then aerobrake in Saturn's upper atmosphere and use it for an additional gravity assist. This is going to require a significant amount of preparation by turning off the reactors and bringing the radiators in to prevent them from being shredded via aerodynamic forces. The crew is going to be submerged in the water tank in order to be supported during the 20 G-forces, but that itself poses huge risks. The Orion drive is going to be used as a massive heat shield, and the ablative liquid should cool the surface to reasonable levels, but nothing like this has ever been done before. Impacting an atmosphere at over 30,000 meters per second is the second most dangerous thing this ship will do, other than existing in the first place. John Bradford, lead cartographer of the Torch. The Torch ship escaped trajectory from Earth 3 million kilometers away, 1 week and a day after pulse. Attention crew, this is your captain speaking. We're restarting Orion Drive in 1 minute, so find a place to sit down. This is going to be a 1-hour-long burn at 2 Gs, so try not to walk around unless it is an emergency. If you get seasick, this is your opportunity to get something before we burn. That S.L. William turned to Carl. Is everything ready to go? Carl nodded. Ablative oil pressure nominal. Pistons have been tuned to near perfection during the previous burn, and the main plate S ablation rate was minimal. We were as ready as possible. Good, I'll start the countdown. This is your captain speaking. Brace for sudden acceleration. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, ignition. The ship shuddered as it went from microgravity to twice the acceleration of Earth in less than a second, then stabilized into the somewhat nauseating acceleration pattern. Man, I don't think I'm ever going to get used to that. Did you know that there was a time when mildly stabilized nitroglycerin was considered the most insane propellant? Dave was sitting heavily reclined at his station, going over the incoming communications from the aliens. Anyways, they were sending us radio signals on multiple frequencies spaced fairly far apart. I am going to send all of these through to Earth once we stop burning. The frequencies are slightly out of phase for human standards, but it's not a huge deal for our computer to compensate. In the 91 megahertz range, there's some noise coming through. Sounds like some form of language. In the 102 megahertz range, it sounds almost like a dial-up connection. If I was to guess, they're trying to send some kind of computer information or something. He paused to catch his breath. Converting that pattern into bits, it appears to be 64-bit, and we get a digital data link speed of approximately 500 kb/s. Nothing insanely fast, but enough for reasonable communication. They probably just want to make sure nothing gets blended together. In the 113 megahertz band, they are sending us numbers again, but this time it's much faster than before. IV put the numbers into our computer, and it appears to be the atomic masses of elements 1 through 120. Although comparing them to a periodic table of our own, the average masses are slightly different, indicating different amounts of isotope concentrations from where they are. The Probe S mission control team, 1 week and 4 days after pulse. Met S console beeped. Okay, the radiation pulses haven't started again. I counted 20 sets, each one a tiny bit blue shifted from the last. I think they are sending a ship or a probe to meet with ours. I also detect a similar thermal signature to the one in transit between their 4th and 6th planet, which is getting slightly blue shifted, meaning that the ship in question is outputting a significant amount of thermal energy. This indicates a large size. Assuming the rejection temperature is the same as the ones around the 6th planet, and given their distance from us, I estimate a power dissipation of almost 4 megawatts. Frankly, I'm having a hard time believing this is even possible. From the amount of blue shifting occurring, their ship must be traveling at 44% the speed of light. And they accelerated to that velocity in less than 4 days? With a ship carrying generators capable of outputting 4 megawatts? Nothing in our records indicates any technology like this existing. From the distance we estimated, their ship will be here in less than half a year. It took us 10 years to get to our heliopause. If I am right, they've expended about 74,000 nuclear devices just to move a ship. Who does that? We haven't even made a supercritical fission device in almost 50 years, and the last ones in existence are being converted into fuel for nuclear reactors. Carr looked worried. Also, they were going to have to expend a similar number of the devices in order to slow down if they intend on docking with our craft. So we need to prepare a stationary warp field in order to not have any ill effects from this, assuming that even possible. They're going to be pointing the end of that device at us while they do that, and I don't think the ablative shield we use for the solar dives will hold up to a point-blank nuke. We've already breached their heliosphere, but I think we can use some of the remaining fuel for the MHD in order to hop out again. It still has a bit of charge, so it should be able to just get out. NASA Jovian HQ Earth, 2 weeks after Pulse. Researcher Kenny was very happy. The fact that they sent us the instructions for an entire operating system is a godsend. Now we just need to send them a confirmation that we got the OS working, and they can start sending actual programs. The Torch ship, en route to probe, 2 weeks and a day since Pulse. So you were absolutely 100% certain that our route is perfect? Captain William was worried about the operation they were about to do. Normally, ships would use large spinning rings for artificial gravity, but those rings were fairly fragile to axial forces and would also exceed the radiation shadow given to the ship by the pusher plate. This left the Torch with only one practical option. The plan was to release a large counterweight on a 2-kilometer-long cable cluster in front of the ship and slowly spin the ship up until the centrifugal force gave them about 1 g of gravity. The only problem with this was that this process took an entire day, and there was no way to maneuver the ship while it was spinning, because that would screw with the counterweight system and potentially cause serious damage once the cable slammed taut again. A set of cables was going to essentially support the weight of the entire ship. Yes, I am completely sure. Our crew needs to be at peak condition so our bones don't get crushed, and our hearts don't pop when we fire the Orion drive to decelerate. John was a tad bit annoyed at the captain's reluctance to start the process, although it was understandable. A group of people was about to be handling a 500-ton water tank and 16 massive cables in the vacuum of space. While it was effectively weightless, it still had an incredible amount of inertia, and getting crushed between twisting cables was not a good way to go. After the confirmation, Dave began. Okay, I am radioing the EVA team to begin. EVA team, check in over. Elliot ready, over. Katie ready, over. Igor ready, over. Reminder. Once the counterweight is unlocked, keep your hands clear. I don't want to clean freeze-dried blood off the front of my ship loud and clear. Don T make a mess, over. The bridge sat in silence as they watched the EVA crew work on the display. They first unlatched a set of locks holding the toroidal water tank locked to the ship, then, ever so slowly, pushed against it to send it free of the ship. Once it was clear, a set of hydraulic pistons gave it another slight push to send it traveling upwards at 1 meter per second. Elliot and Katie rode on the rear of the tank to check that the integrated cold gas thrusters on the water tank were in operation and used their EVA suit as cold gas thrusters to prevent the tank from rotating. They would not be able to go onto the tank once the ship was spinning, so this was a last check. Igor stayed back to watch the cables and make sure they didn't entangle. Even though space was considered a pretty good vacuum, if a single speck of dust impacted any of the crew members at over 1 million meters per second, they would both become a red mist and also go down in history as the highest velocity human remains ever created. The ship had almost 2 meters of Whipple shielding designed to attenuate the energy and spread the plasma of such events across a large area. Likewise, the 4 cable clusters were covered in a very thin but large diameter foil hoop system, which would prevent any direct hits from space particles from severing the cables. Each cable cluster consisted of 4 cables connected to each other via rigid X-arms every 50 meters and every 10 meters close to the ship. If the cable gets severed, the ends want to fall the entire distance and damage the ship or counterweight. This unfortunately meant that the cables were a bit of a mess and needed to be spooled out very slowly and carefully to prevent entanglement. After about 30 minutes, the tank SD acceleration procedure was implemented. It was surprisingly simple, and Igor just turned on a braking system for the cables, which first took up the slack in the system, then de-accelerated the tank over the course of a few minutes to prevent the tank from rubber banding back. Once this procedure was completed, Elliot and Katie flew back to the ship using their EVA Suit S cold gas thrusters. They got back and headed to the airlock. Once they were inside, the ship began the rotation process. Over the course of 20 hours, cold gas thrusters on the counterweight and the main ship slowly spun the ship to 3 revolutions per minute. Due to the counterweight of the ship weighing 500 tons and the ship itself weighing 10,000 tons, the center of mass of the whole system was about 100 meters away from the ship. The 2-kilometer-long cable was required in order to keep the counterweight S-mass to a reasonable amount. This gave the inhabitants of the ship almost exactly 1 g-force of acceleration, but gave the counterweight almost 20 g's of constant acceleration. This means that nobody is able to go to the counterweight while the ship has been spun up without dying, quickly and gruesomely. Once the ship was spun up, the only thing the crew could really do is wait and keep themselves occupied. 1 g of acceleration prevented microgravity issues like bone deterioration, but they still needed to exercise in a gym to stay physically fit. The following is a deck-by-deck description of some of the main parts of the ship. There are 5 decks in the main crew area. Deck 1 is the closest unrestricted deck to the Orion Drive, and Deck 5 is farthest away. Below Deck 1 begin the 7 restricted decks, which only specific authorized personnel are allowed to enter. This consists of the nuclear reactor rooms, the Orion Drive S magazines, and the main life support. A citation may be required, but it is generally considered a good idea to highly restrict a random person's access to 500 tons of highly enriched uranium sitting in over 4,000 tons of actual explosives. Deck B7. This deck consists of the equipment required to absorb the recoil of the pusher plate as it comes towards the ship, as well as the systems required to keep the plate and blast doors cooled. It is by far the largest single deck due to the size of the pistons and sheer energy dissipated. It also holds the nuke gun itself and the loading system. Decks B6 through B3 are the magazines and ammunition handling rooms. While there are only 3 decks, each of these consist of multiple layers of ammunition magazines, with a total of 230,000 low-energy fission devices, each weighing almost exactly 20 kilograms and providing a yield of 10 kilotons TNT. This yield efficiency was accomplished through an incredible breakthrough of ultra-high energy density nitrogen explosive research, allowing single crystal growth of pure octa-zacubane. Although only a few individuals know this, the ship also contains 5 100 KT fusion-boosted Kasaba howitzers. They can be fired from the Orion Drive S gun and are officially only to be used for emergency deflecting purposes to save a stationary colony from a rogue ship or asteroid. The only people allowed into these levels without supervision are an individual named Chekhov Gunther and the captain himself. Decks B2 and B1 contain the 4 nuclear reactors and the connection to the main radiators. They run supercritical CO2 through a Brayton cycle gas turbine in order to achieve high-grade heat waste in order to limit the size of the radiators, as well as reducing the size of the turbines themselves compared to using steam. They are staffed by a group of 20 engineers and operators working in groups of 5. Deck 1 contains the bridge, tactical room, cartography room, sensor room, and the main communications equipment. The bridge is where the captain and the main crew sit most of the time. There are 5 recessed immersion pods, so they can continue to do their jobs while burning at 20 Gs. While this might not actually happen, you know that shit's going down if the captain is breathing pure oxygen dissolved in fluorocarbons in order to make split-second decisions, while manually piloting a nuclear bomb-powered ship at 20 Gs through a combat zone, and Chekhov is flinging full-power Kasabas around. The tactical room is essentially the combat information center. They monitor the space around the ship, prevent electronic warfare from interfering with the ship, and interpret data given to them from the sensor room. The cartography room is where the actual piloting goes on most of the time. This small group of reclusive individuals spend days plotting trajectories and calculating timetables, triple-check the computer S-work, then input everything that the ship is going to do a week in advance. The sensor room handles the raw information that is given to them by observing the activities occurring in space millions of kilometers away. They have infrared cameras powerful enough to pick up a wet fart on the North Pole from the moon, and algorithms powerful enough to know the weight and gender of the individual who tried to hide it. However, such a large amount of information cannot possibly be useful unless it is processed down to discrete blocks of significant information. As such, every capital ship which produces infrared radiation has a trajectory plotted out for the next 3 years. Almost every asteroid large enough to pose a risk has been flagged, and foreign bodies sitting pretty very far away are being continuously monitored for changes in trajectory. The communications room is where the ship sets up data links with every other ship with working equipment. This room by itself can use up to 2 megawatts of power when they need to send a signal which is capable of cutting through the Orion Drive S radiation, but it doesn't too often do so. Deck 2 is the microfabricator, main cargo bay, and the airlock. The microfabricator is a room which contains a set of fabrication equipment. This consists of a plastic 3D printer, a metal 3D printer, and a CNC machine. It is useful for when random stuff breaks and for personal projects. Stuff goes into the ship via airlock directly into the cargo bay, where it is sorted and sent off to where it belongs. Long missions require large amounts of food. Due to the nature of the ship's cosmic ray shielding, water isn't really a problem, but there are some reserves in the cargo bay just in case. The airlock is large enough to accept a 4-meter by 4-meter lightweight space shipping crate. Deck 3 contains the galley, hydroponics area, and sleeping quarters. The kitchen and galley are designed for both normal gravity, inverted gravity, and microgravity. This is done through using a vertically symmetrical design with magnetic-based and topped heating elements and a specialized centrifugal stovetop. If the ship is in microgravity, the cook can stick the centrifugal stovetop on, and food will stick to the surface anyways. If the gravity gets inverted during a firing of the arc jet, which provides less than a 50th of a G, but still inverts the gravity enough to be annoying, they simply move the stovetop to what was previously the roof and work from there instead. Deck 3 also contains a fairly large hydroponics bay powered by UV lamps for assisting the ship's carbon cycle, as well as providing fresh produce for the crew to keep up morale. The crops are varied and consist of onions, broccoli, carrots, lettuce, celery, and a large variety of other herbs and bitter greens. The few parts of the plants which are unable to be eaten directly are fed to crickets in order to make a protein blend, which gets added to the flour for freshly baked bread. The crew members don't care or know unless they specifically asked for the ingredients, and it doesn't even have a taste. Although nobody who signed up was vegan or vegetarian, the majority of calories coming from the ship were from plants. It is just very hard to get bulk meat into space, and growing it takes more energy per calorie than growing simple starches. However, bugs are a surprisingly low-cost alternative in order to get protein, and they cut down on the food waste, so it's a win-win. When it comes to sleeping arrangements, there are a set of 25 bunk rooms with 4 bunks each. They were aligned with the normal gravity, vertically symmetrical, and the sleeping pad has Velcro on it to keep the sleeping bag stuck to the bed. If gravity reverses, it is simple to take out the pad and put it on the other side of the bunk. Deck 4 contains the gym equipment, G-pool, and the storm shelter. Due to the long journey times, even as shortened as they were due to being an early torch ship, the ship has a gym consisting of surprisingly normal, if low-mass equipment. Weights were replaced by rubber-resistive bands, but most of the equipment would have an equivalent seen in a normal gym. It even had a few treadmills, a rowing machine, and a set of bikes. Like most objects in the ship, all of the equipment was secured to prevent things from shifting in 0 or negative G-forces. However, this room is not vertically symmetrical. Unlike cooking, a 50th of a G would not be enough to affect the goings-on of a room in which there were no free weights anyways. Running would just be done with elastics holding the person down. The G-pool. This is a shallow pool designed to hold salted water in order to support the crew during intense G-forces. During extreme emergency burns or aerobraking, the ship was designed to withstand up to 25 G-forces in the vertical direction, and the crew would be required to be submerged in said pool of water or risk rupturing various parts of their body. However, there's no reason to let the pool go to waste during normal flight, so it is used as a recreational, if shallow, saltwater pool. The storm shelter is a room which is extra protected from a single direction of radiation. It is a ring-shaped room which places the majority of all radiation shielding equipment between a point radiation source and the crew in there. This includes the control rods and uranium of the nuclear reactors, the magazines of nuclear charges, and in general the most metal out of any point of the ship. There are other places which fit this criteria, but this can hold the entire crew in it at one point. With over 5 meters of steel, plastic, lithium, beryllium, and water blocking the path, it's probably capable of withstanding a direct hit from a gamma-ray laser without exceeding their yearly recommended dose of radiation. Deck 5 contains the relaxation lounge. Due to being at the top of a hemispherical section of the tank, this deck is slightly smaller than the other decks. There is a few rooms in the lounge. One room contains 4 sets of consoles for playing video games and can handle up to 16 players at one time for LAN parties. The second room contains a very small library of physical books written on electronic paper. This gives the person reading the book the feel of flipping through an actual book, but the books are able to change their writing at will, so the ship doesn't need to carry multiple tons of paper in order to have access to an entire library's worth of books. There is chairs and beanbags to sit on in order to get comfortable. In the third room, there's a set of 10 computer consoles which are used for PC games or personal CID projects. In the fourth room sits a small cafe bar. The captain personally brought both a legitimate antique Space Trek pinball machine from the year 2100 and an actual jukebox into that room in order to give it a certain ambience.